Ken, we've got another excellent guest today. We are joined by author Kathy Sanders. Before I say too much, Ken, why don't you just give everybody a little bit of background on Mrs. Sanders and fill them in on what we're going to be talking about today. This is a big, huge topic. How are you, by the way?
Oh, I'm good. Yeah, thanks for having me again. And yeah, this one's near and dear to the heart. I think we were going to talk about the recent news about the Trump assassination attempt, but that guy's going to trial in September. There'll be plenty of time to talk about that later. Today, Kathy Wilburn Sanders. She's got a tragic story, but a really courageous story and an inspiring story. She lost her two grandsons in the Oklahoma City bombing almost 30 years ago to the day, and she just published a book about her 30-year investigation. Maybe people have read a lot of books, journalism, documentaries about OKC. Well, she was the first. Her and her husband were the first people to raise questions about the government's investigation and the lack thereof. And yeah, she'll tell us all about it.
Welcome to the show, Kathy. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to have this opportunity. As Ken said, I spent the last 30 years investigating the Oklahoma City bombing. You see, the morning of the bombing, my grandchildren lived with me along with my mother, my daughter. She's a divorced mother. And I went in to wake them up the morning of the bombing. I went in their bedroom, and the little boys weren't in their bed. So I went down the hall to my daughter's room, and I flipped on the light. And there, on either side of my daughter, was her little boys. They had toddled down the hall, and they'd gone to bed with their mama for the last night of their lives. We took the boys to daycare, dropped them off that morning, never thinking it was going to be the last time we would ever see them. They were having the office birthday party for Edie. She and I worked in the same building, and they were having the office birthday parties. And Edie was walking across the floor to blow out the candles on her birthday cake when the bomb went off. And I'm saying, Edie, let's go see. And we run down 3 flights of stairs and out the front of the building, and it was like we entered the twilight zone. There was plate glass falling down all around us, and not a car one was moving in the street. And we looked up toward the Murrah building, or toward the bank. Someone had said they blew up the bank. We looked toward the bank, and the bank was intact. And then I looked at the Murrah building, and I saw the smoke rising. And I said, Edie, the babies. And we took off running, and we got to the south side of the building, and we stopped and were surveying the damage. The windows are blown out, but the building was intact. And then we hear boom, 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 and we see all this black billowing smoke. And we ran around to the north side of the building, and as you can see there on the screen, it was just gone. On the second floor where the daycare was nothing left but a pancake pile of rubble. My daughter fell to her knees and began to cry, and it was the first time in my daughter's life she had a problem that her mother wasn't going to be able to fix. We tried to climb up the rubble. We didn't have enough sense to go around to the south side where the stairwell was. We wanted to go in there where we dropped the babies off there on the north side. And I'll never forget, it was a jacketed ATF agent that kept me out. And I remember looking at him and I'm thinking, ATF, who is that? And does he have the power to keep me out of here? My children are there. Then all of a sudden there came a second bomb threat, and people are yelling, get back, get back. And they take off running, stampeding away from the building, and we're trying to get in the building. Well, it turned out that was an inert bomb, a training aid that had fallen from the ATF office on the 9th floor, I guess, to the ground level there in the parking garage beneath the building. And we were told, you've got to leave the area, go to the children's hospital. That's where the children will be taken when they're removed from from the building and wait there. So we went to the children's hospital. Uh, my son was an off-duty police officer, and he was watching the coverage of the bombing on TV, and he sees his mom and his sister. And he comes downtown to find us. He comes in and he says, "Mama, don't worry, I'm going to find the boys." And he left that day, and when he came back, I knew something was wrong. I said, "What is it, son? What is it?" And he goes, "Mom, did Colton have on little green shorts and a white shirt?" I said, "Yeah, son, that's Colton." And then I knew my big old Marine son had tears in his eyes, and I'm saying, "Danny, is the baby gone? Is the baby gone?" And he goes, "Yeah, Mama, Colton's gone." And he says, "Where's Edie? I've got to tell her." I said, "Well, she's around in the chaplain's office." And he ran around the corner, and in a few minutes, I heard my daughter give a blood-curdling scream, and I knew my son had found her. He left again that day, and he found my oldest grandson. We later found out that the youngest one, a rescue worker, went in to try to find someone that was alive, and he dug him from the rubble, and he was whimpering, but he died in his arms because he'd been gutted by a glass shard. My other grandson had a rock embedded in the back of his head. So I'm telling you, these were some rough times. These were some sad times. It was, the whole world reached out to love us. And then I realized, oh my goodness, I haven't reached out to the other families. There were 19 families that lost their children. So I had a dinner at my home for those families. And at that dinner, one of the young mothers said that when she dropped her son off at the daycare, she had seen the bomb squad downtown. Well, we didn't believe her. It's like, how do you know? How do you know it was the bomb squad? And she said they had big blue letters across their jacket. Well, the next day, my husband goes down to the fire department, and he asked the fire chief, "Did you all have prior knowledge? Was the bomb squad downtown before the bomb went off?" And the fire chief said, "Oh, no way. Our bomb truck wasn't down there." Well, then we went home and we found an article in the newspaper of Panola Watchman where they had interviewed these people, and there was a whole office full of people that were watching the bomb squad in the alley before the bomb went off. And when confronted with that news, the fire chief called a press conference, and he said, "You know what? We made a mistake. We were just running routine errands," and the guy stopped to get a cup of coffee. But it wasn't just the bomb truck. It was pulling the trailer with the bomb disposal unit on it. And, I guess had it only been that, maybe we could have let it go. But there were so many other things that happened. The largest manhunt in American history was going on at that time for John Doe number 2. And we were interested in that. Who is this John Doe 2? And then all of a sudden the FBI calls it off and said, it was just a big mistake. And now we're really getting interested in investigating. It's like, how can that be? We learned there were 22 eyewitnesses that saw McVeigh downtown the day of the bombing. There was not one eyewitness that saw him alone. Many of those eyewitnesses described the same dark-skinned man with the ball cap on his head that had flames on the side, stocky build. One of those eyewitnesses even picked McVeigh out of the lineup. And then we learned about the Dreamland Motel where McVeigh stayed the week before the bombing. He's there. While he's there, and keep in mind, he drove the bomb truck with the bomb in it from the Dreamland to the front of the Murrah building. That week he was there, according to Leah McGowan, the owner of the motel, her son, the housekeeper, even the Chinese food delivery boy. They all said there were other people in the room with McVeigh. The Chinese food delivery boy said, it wasn't McVeigh that I gave the food to. The FBI never identified who those men were, and it was very troubling to us. Then I had this idea, and I thought, well, you know what? If Stephen Jones, McVeigh's attorney, wants to point the finger at someone else, I'll be happy to help him. I want to know who these other people were. I started working with the Jones team investigators, and I was an asset to them because nobody wanted to help Tim McVeigh and by giving them any information. So they wouldn't talk to the investigators, but they would talk to me because I was a victim. And I became privy to a lot of the FBI 302 witness statements. That's how I knew who talked to the FBI, what their description was about John Doe number 2, what was going on. I learned about Carol Howe. I have her records. Carol Howe was an ATF informant working at Elohim City, which is like a terrorist training compound on the Oklahoma-Arkansas border. And in her reports to her handler, she's telling them that people at that compound are planning a bombing. She's gone on 3 different excursions with them to target buildings they plan to blow up, and one of them was the federal building in Oklahoma City. I was able to obtain McVeigh's phone records. McVeigh called Elohim City 2 weeks before the bombing, 2 minutes after calling the Ryder Truck Rental Company. He asked to speak to a fellow by the name of Andreas Strassmeyer. The FBI interviewed hundreds of people in connection with Timothy McVeigh, including his 3rd grade school teacher, but they never thought that it was important to talk to Andreas Strassmeyer, a German citizen that left the country and returned to Germany. It was more than a year later that the FBI called and did a telephone interview with him. There were
Kathy, excuse me for one moment.
Mhm.
There's so much information here. I think most people know very, very little about the Oklahoma City bombing. Your knowledge is incredibly impressive, and I'm sure all of this is detailed in your book, Shadows of Conspiracy, The Untold Story of Oklahoma City. This has just been out for a little over a week, and it's already receiving excellent reviews on Amazon.com. Now, as you're explaining all these details to us, it occurs to me, I mean, is your background in journalism or investigation? I mean, the details that you're bringing forward are so amazing.
No, but before this happened, I was Betty Crocker. You know, I wouldn't even have believed this. I wouldn't even have believed this story if it hadn't happened to me. I've
You
been,
successfully sued the nursing home, though, didn't you?
well, that's true. Uh, my first step in learning of investigating, my mom had Alzheimer's disease, and I kept her for a number of years, and then I had to place her in a nursing home. I would go in to see her often. I went in and they had her tied one day, and I said, "Don't tie my mother," because it was like my mother thought she had been kidnapped
Oh my
and she
God.
was frantic. And I said, "Do not tie my mother." Well, a couple of days later, they called me and said that my mother had a heart attack and died.
Oh my God.
When I got there, the coroner was there, and he's like, "Look at the bruising around her neck. You know, she didn't die. She
They-
was they." And then we found the posy belt, the thing that they tie him in the chair with. We
Oh my
found that in
God.
the laundry. That night, I found out who was on shift that day, and I found a housekeeper, and she was living in like one of those weekly hotel kind of things. I bought a bottle of scotch and I got some cigarettes, and I went to see this housekeeper. And I said, "You know, my mother's Miss Graham. She died today." And she said, "Well, I really can't talk to you." And I said, "Well, you know, my mom died. It's pretty important." And I pulled my bottle of scotch out. In my cigarette case there, I had a tape recorder, and I set it out there.
Wow.
And she began to loosen up, and she said, "Well, you know, hon, I went in your mother's room, and your mother was in the chair, and she was down with that posy belt around her neck, and she was trying to get up." She goes, I'm a housekeeper. I'm not allowed to touch a patient. She said, I went down to the nurse's station and they were in the break room eating lunch. And I told them, Miss Graham is going to strangle if someone doesn't go help her. Well, they didn't go help her. And when they brought mother's lunch in, they found her dead. And that's what the housekeeper told me. And thus why she had the strangulation marks around her neck. So that was my first time I ever investigated anything. But I've learned a lot over these years. I've been to Elohim City. I've met with Carol Howe, the ATF informant, on a number of occasions. I've been to her parents' home. I've talked to Dennis Mahon. He invited me to come for Thanksgiving. Dennis Mahon was one of the men that went with Andreas Strassmeyer and Carol Howe to target buildings they planned on blowing up. One of them was the federal building. I've met with Terry Nichols a number of times, and he promised that he would tell me everything that happened regarding the bombing. But when his state and his federal trial was over and he wasn't any longer under the threat of a death penalty. So
Wow.
I was looking forward to that. The federal trial was over. The state trial was over. Then 60 Minutes was going to do something they had never done before. They wanted to interview Terry Nichols just like they had Tim McVeigh, but they had a problem. Terry agreed he would do an interview for them, but the only way he'd do the interview is if I conducted it. He told me he didn't trust Ed Bradley to put him in a good light, and he wanted me to do the interview. So I was going to go into the prison as a 60 Minutes correspondent, and I was going to interview Nichols. And when I came out, then Ed Bradley was going to interview me. Well, we were wrangled with the prison system for a year and a half, 60 Minutes and I. I've got the letter here in my home from the warden that he refused to let it happen. He deemed me a security risk to the inmates, to the staff, and to the public at large. Now, Florence, Colorado, that's the baddest of the bad. There isn't another.
You do look pretty dangerous.
I got a speeding ticket once, but that's the list.
So let me just pause you again, because this is an unbelievable story that you're sharing, and I really appreciate the part that you opened with, where you said you would have never believed this if somebody had told it to you, but you have experienced it in your own life, and now it's been 30 years. And recently, maybe within the last, say, 5 to 10 years, we've heard figures like Donald Trump talking about fake news, weaponization of the courts. This has been your life for the past 3 decades, isn't that true?
Well, I've certainly been investigating. I'm careful because, Jason, I don't want to say all law enforcement is bad. I don't want to say all FBI is bad or all ATF is bad. But it has caused me to question the story that I've been given. As part of the 60 Minutes story, when we couldn't get in to do that interview, Terry calls me and he says, you go to this 60 Minutes set, and I'm going to call you on this date. Guys, it was the day Ed Bradley died. It was September of 2006. Well, insignificant. He goes, I'm going to call you on this day, and I'm going to tell you everything. Now, here's a man that only gets 2 15-minute calls a month, and he was going to use both of his calls to tell me what really happened in the Oklahoma City bombing. And when I got to the 60 Minutes, they flew me out there. I got in their office. They did my hair. They did my makeup. They told me when I got there, Ed Bradley was very sick, but it's taken us a year and a half to get to this point. We don't want to delay the interview anymore because Terry could tell us the date he was going to call, but he didn't know the time that they would bring the phone to him. So I'm there. They tell me Ed Bradley's very sick, but we're going to have him do it. And they hook my phone up and we begin to wait. After a few hours, they come in and say, I'm so sorry, but Ed Bradley has just passed away and we're going to have to shut down the set. So I was devastated because I had done a story with Ed and I was sad to see the 60 Minutes people mourning, but I was really sad because for 30 years, I've ridden this roller coaster experience. You get so close to think you're going to get some truth and then it goes down. And then I pull myself together. It's like, it's okay. Terry still will call me and I don't care if it's on TV or not. I want to know what happened. And keep in mind, Terry Nichols had been calling me for 10 years. He didn't call. I didn't know what happened. We went back to Arkansas, where we live. And on a couple of days later, Terry Nichols' mother calls me. And she said, Kathy, Terry wanted me to let you know that on the day he was to call you, the warden notified him that you were taken off his calling list. So he's no longer allowed to call me.
Whoa.
Now, for 10 years, I've been talking to that man. And on the day he's going to tell me everything, he's taken off the calling list. Why would the warden care what he was going to say? I don't believe he would, but somebody somewhere sure did.
Wow. Kathy, there's so much to discuss here. We've got about 5 minutes more here on this segment, and then we're going to be going over to a sponsor-only segment. People are going to join us for that on substack.com/@KenSilva, also on odyssey.com/@CrowdsourceTheTruth, and all of the other Crowdsource the Truth sponsored channels. I hope you'll join us for that. I feel like this could be a whole series of conversations. You've been studying this for years. It's such a complicated and convoluted story. Will you be able to stay with us for a little while longer after the break?
I'll be happy to.
Okay, because I want to ask you, I know you got to be very careful not to speculate, but you've been researching this for so many years, and you raise these points like, how could the warden be coordinated with this effort, and all of these things that are really suggestive of some sort of extremely powerful hidden hand that is directing some of this. And I'm going to want to ask you about some of that in the next segment. Ken, we've been listening to this incredible story. I know you have been studying the Oklahoma City attack for so many years. Has Kathy shared anything, or have you had a chance to read the book yet? What are your thoughts on what we're hearing right now?
Yeah, I read Kathy's first book about her relationship with Terry Nichols, how she came to forgive him. And she has that story about how they kind of stonewalled her interview at Florence Supermax. And I can't help. We talked to Christina, the documentary, who's making a documentary about the Whitmer kidnapping case. And of course, we talked last week how she was interviewing those two guys in county jail in Michigan. And the very next day, they shipped them to Florence.
Right.
So that seems to be the facility where they put people who they don't want to talk to the media. So these kind of issues are still, recycling these days in current cases.
And I want to just add, Jason, I've been careful over the years who I associate with, because a lot of people, they have conspiracy theories and they make up things that this could have happened or that could have happened.
Right.
But I don't do that. Everything, the truth I found was documented. We talked about Carol Howe. You're going for a break. The truth I found was documented. In my book, it's a historical fiction. I tell the story just like you would on a fiction book about Abraham Lincoln. I described the bombing, how it went down, and I placed those people that I believe were with him. Jennifer McVeigh, Tim McVeigh's sister, she says in her confession to the FBI that I have downstairs in my home that she was laundering $100 bills for her brother that came from bank robberies.
Whoa.
There was a group of bank robbers that lived in Elohim City, the very place that McVeigh had called. I have McVeigh's speeding ticket, which is right out in a mile of Elohim City. A boy from New York, He got a speeding ticket out there in the months before the bombing. He was there. There was a hotbed. She was an informant. They didn't act on it, and we can
Wow.
talk about it after the break.
Absolutely, absolutely, Kathy. This is amazing. You've got so much incredible information here. I know people are going to want to go and get the book, Shadows of Conspiracy, The Untold Story of the Oklahoma City Bombing. This is coming directly from a victim, a survivor. Family members were killed. It's a tragic, tragic story. And Kathy, your grasp on the facts is just nearly unbelievable. We're going to be back in less than 5 minutes, everybody. So please stay with us. If you're not already subscribed to Ken, please visit substack.com/@Ken Silva. Thanks to all of the viewers who sponsor Crowdsource the Truth. We'll be back. Stay with us, everyone, and thanks for watching.